Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to unpack a truly brilliant piece of classic wisdom today. We're looking at the famous story of Tenali Rama and the Bell of Justice. So let's just dive right into this wonderful tale. We're going to explore it not just as a simple fable, but as a really sharp, timeless analysis of empathy, responsibility, and, well, the very nature of fairness. It's a story that kicks off with a basic administrative decree and wraps up with a profound moral lesson that absolutely still resonates today.
Now, right off the bat, I want you to think about this question. Is justice only meant for humans? Like, when we build these massive systems of law and courts and fairness, who are we actually trying to protect? We're going to hook into this philosophical question right away, setting the stage for a really fascinating mystery that went down right in the heart of King Krishnadevaraya's royal court. And honestly, the answer to this question challenges the absolute foundation of how a kingdom operates.
Section 1. The unique Bell of Justice.
Okay, so to really grasp the scale of this story, we've got to set the scene. King Krishnadevaraya was dead set on ensuring absolute fairness in his kingdom. He didn't just want, a regular boring court system. He wanted a direct line to his people. So he did something wild. He had this massive physical bell of justice installed right outside his palace doors. This was a grand initiative, a huge, highly visible symbol, letting everyone know their ruler was totally accessible. The rule was simple, and his decree was absolute. He proclaimed, if anyone faces injustice and finds no justice elsewhere, they can ring this bell. I will personally hear their case. I mean, just think about the stakes there. This wasn't some slow bureaucratic process. This was a personal guarantee from the ruler himself. He was literally cutting through all the red tape. If you had nowhere else to turn, the king himself was going to be your judge.
But here's where the whole thing gets incredibly interesting. After this giant bell was put up with its thick, heavy rope hanging all the way down, absolutely nothing happened. Months of total silence went by, not a single ding. You can kind of feel the suspense building, right? Like, was the kingdom just so perfectly fair that nobody needed the king's help? Or was that giant bell just hanging there, waiting for a very specific, desperate petitioner to step forward? Actually, so much time passed that grass literally began to grow up and wrap around the bell's rope.
Section 2. The bell rings suddenly.
So one morning, that peaceful, quiet silence of the palace is totally shattered. Out of nowhere, the bell starts ringing. And I don't mean a little tap, it is ringing loudly, desperately, just echoing through the royal halls. The king, being a man of his word, immediately dropped whatever he was doing and rushed outside to meet this aggrieved citizen. Imagine the anticipation for the king and his guards as they hurried to the gates. Who finally rang the bell after all those months of silence? What kind of desperate person finally summoned the courage to yank that heavy rope and demand a one-on-one with the king? Was it a wronged merchant? Maybe a displaced farmer? The tension here is just palpable.
Section 3. A voiceless petitioner. But as those heavy palace doors swing open, the king gets a massive shock. There's no angry merchant, no crying citizen. Actually, as they look down at the base of the bell, they realize there's no human petitioner there at all. The reality of the scene was completely unexpected and, honestly, utterly pathetic. Standing there wasn't a person, but a terribly old, starving horse. Remember how I mentioned the grass growing on that unused rope? Well, this poor creature was so incredibly hungry that it had wandered right up to the palace and started chewing on the grass-covered bell rope. And as it tugged at the grass just trying to fill its stomach, it completely accidentally rang the great bell of justice.
The king was absolutely floored. But standing right nearby was his super clever advisor, Tenali Rama. Looking at this starving animal, Tenali Rama offered a witty yet profoundly deep observation. He looked at the king and said, "Maharaj, it seems this horse has also come to seek justice." It was a brilliant move. He completely reframed the animal's physical hunger and desperate state, not just as some random accident, but as a literal plea for justice from a creature that couldn't even speak for itself.
Section 4. The owner's selfishness.
The king immediately realized Tenali Rama hit the nail on the head. An injustice was happening right on his own doorstep. So he launches an immediate inquiry and summons the owner of the horse to the palace to figure out the heartbreaking truth behind this animal's terrible condition. And what they found? A textbook case of selfishness and betrayal. Just look at the stark contrast here. In its youth, this horse had served its master faithfully for years and years, doing all the heavy lifting and hard labor required of it. But the second it got too old to work, the owner just kicked it out, leaving it to wander the streets just trying to find scraps to fill its stomach. The absolute loyalty of the animal was met with sheer cruelty from the human.
Hearing all this, the king was deeply saddened.
Then, Tenali Rama turned to the king, and right in front of this deeply ashamed owner, he asked a direct, piercing question. Is it right to abandon an animal in old age after a lifetime of service? The owner had absolutely no defense. He just stood there with his head bowed in shame because the answer, undeniably, is no way. It is a fundamental betrayal of a lifelong partnership.
So the king delivered a strict, unyielding verdict. He ordered that the owner must take the horse back and care for it for the rest of its natural life. And he attached a massive consequence to this. Failure to do so would result in severe punishment. This definitive judgment basically forced the owner to own up to his grave mistake, and he took the horse back home with the respect it actually deserved all along.
Section 5. True Justice.
So the crisis was resolved, and the horse was saved. But the king realized with total amazement that on that specific day, the bell of justice was rung not by a human, but by a voiceless creature. Tenali Rama smiled at the king's realization and summed up the whole event with this incredibly powerful quote. True justice is that which protects the voiceless alongside those who can speak. And this just brilliantly illustrates the ultimate definition of fairness in our society. A system of justice is really only as strong as how well it protects the most vulnerable, the ones who don't have the language, the power, or the money to fight for themselves.
Which brings us to the core message drawn straight from the source text, the ultimate lesson here. Never abandon those who stood by you through joys and sorrows when they reach old age or hard times. Yes, this obviously applies to animals, but it's a universal law of loyalty and responsibility. Discarding someone, or something, just because they've outlived their physical usefulness to you, that's framed here as the absolute greatest injustice of all.
We've seen how a kingdom's grand, imposing bell was ultimately purposed for a starving horse. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. How do we treat the vulnerable and voiceless in our own lives? Whether it's aging pets, elderly members of our community, or literally anyone who has lost their ability to advocate for themselves, true justice always starts with how we answer their unspoken calls for help. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this story stays with you as you navigate your own world.